We took it from 0 to 100 million ARR on all the add-on products in less than 5 years. It's one of those things that customers weren't asking for. When you get to a couple million to 3 million of ARR, you want to have at least one add-on product along the way now.
If you were to start a vertical SaaS company today, what space would you dive into first? What's up, guys? I'm Soward, co-founder of Orbital, and welcome to the next episode of the Vertical SaaS Go-to-Market Playbook. Today, I'm joined by Ershad. Ershad was the vertical SaaS legend, was one of the early employees at the giant ServiceTitan, where he was a chief growth officer for 6 years, and then has gone on to serve on numerous boards, advisement positions, and executive roles at a range of other vertical SaaS companies. Ershad, we're really excited to have you on the show today.
Excited to be here.
So topic for today is really talking about product cross-sell and upsell. Obviously, this is a huge motion for vertical SaaS companies, and a lot of it comes down to this concept of going from a single product to multi-product, which I know is something you guys did really well at ServiceTitan. And so I think to start, the first question is, why should companies kind of think about going from single product to multi-product? And I know you saw this firsthand at ServiceTitan, so it might be helpful to just hear a bit about that journey you guys went through.
Yeah, definitely, Riley, and great question. I got to rewind 10 years ago when I started ServiceTitan. It was less than 3 million of ARR. And at the time, kind of similar to most companies back then, vertical SaaS companies focused on an industry, there's like one core product that was servicing the customer. And in the world of contracting, in terms of everyone interacts, whether it's a plumber, an HVAC, contractor or electrician, and the software essentially helps them, schedule work and, get dispatched to the job, perform work at the job itself. So it's like one big software that does that. And that kind of thesis, we kind of came about after probably as late 2015, essentially, 10 years ago, was that the core software was servicing the customers pretty well. But we thought that there's other opportunities to bring in essentially what's called share of wallet. So if, a small business or a business in general is spending money somewhere else, could we eventually build something similar to that and create even more value? One great example I always give is marketing automation. If you think about a business, especially B2B2C, right? Their customers or consumers like you and I, they spend a lot of money as a small business on marketing. And that's just one category of many categories. And what was interesting back then is there was no playbooks about, hey, it should be multi-product. You fast forward today, there's a lot of playbooks in place. We've done it. A lot of other companies like Toast and others have done it as well. And so it's kind of a proven, product strategy and go-to-market strategy in general. But what's interesting, because I work with a lot of different vertical SaaS companies, every company in every different vertical has its own different flavor. So some products will work in one and maybe not others, or some partners behind the scenes work and sometimes they don't. So you really got to customize it to your business.
Yeah, excited to dive into a bunch around this. I'm curious, just first fast forwarding from ServiceTitan when you guys started thinking about multi-product to the time you left, like what percentage of your revenue was from beyond just that kind of first core product?
Yeah. We took it, from 0 to 100 million ARR on all the add-on products in less than 5 years. I think that the good thing to think about too, which a lot of folks don't tend to upfront, is that it also increases the gross revenue retention of the overall customers as well, because you're adding more products. And if you kind of strategize and do it the right way, you can actually have high gross margin products as well. So in aggregate, when it was 100 million of ARR, call it around 80% gross margins was kind of the products we're delivering to the overall business, which is great, especially for vertical SaaS. Nowadays it's probably 30 to 40% of overall ARR.
Okay, so that you would say 30 to 40% is standard across.
Yeah, unless you're like a fintech company where it's, powering most of your revenue, then the fintech side could cover, 60 to 80%, kind of similar to Toast. The most traditional vertical SaaS companies, where they charge for a core platform, have add-on products on top of it, the goal is usually 30 to 40%.
I'm curious, just at a high level, what are even the different types of products you could think about as you think about increasing wallet share?
Yeah, the one thing we did is we look at our customers' spend in general. So we look at their P&Ls. Hey, what else are they spending money on other than like our core software? Obviously marketing is a category. One, specifically in the trades is like material and equipment. They're buying equipment from big OEMs and manufacturers. For example, in HVAC, there's Trane, Lennox, and Carrier, which are the predominant big ones in the US. But
Mhm.
they also spend a lot of money on labor, and in insurance and in rent and in financial services solutions like credit cards and checks and things like that. So one way of looking at it is the share of wallet and what your customers are spending money on.
So marketing's one. I guess when you guys were thinking about this at ServiceTitan, like, did you guys sort of break down that actual wallet share and how did you do that? I'm guessing, did you just go talk to customers and literally say, like, break down your annual budget, or how did you actually map that out?
Yeah, I mean, we got a bunch of P&Ls, we did surveys, webinars, one-on-one interviews, kind of like typical product diligence, but like at a grander scale. I think the important thing to think about too is a lot of software companies services different size of customers, their own categories of SMB, market, and enterprise. And they have, for example, different verticals within their software as well. So right, if you're serving a plumber versus servicing a garage door contractor or a landscaper, they may not always adopt the same product. Also, depending upon the size, enterprise customer may not think a market automation solution is ready for them versus an SMB would. So you kind of also have to think of it as the size of your customers and how much they would they adopt the product, and also in terms of like the verticals you're going after, because it's not always the same thing. So we did think
Mhm.
through all of that, at least at a high level, and we essentially created like a 5-year roadmap of what we wanted to build.
Wow.
I think we maybe hit 75, 80% of that roadmap from the initial thesis in like 2015. And I use like that baseball analogy. It's since you're so close with your customers, essentially most of the product should be home runs. It should be like knocking it out of the park, whether customer adoption, ARR goals, GRR, or just overall goals in general. Just because we as vertical SaaS companies have the ability of like engaging and understanding what the customers want.
So let's start with ServiceTitan as an example. You had the core platform. I'd be curious, what were those first couple, or I guess I maybe just hearing the whole evolution from the core platform to what it looked like when you guys were at 100 million ARR. And then we're going to dive deeper into actually, when's the right time to start thinking about it and how to prioritize those different potential add-ons.
Yeah, good question. So I think a lot of vertical SaaS are similar in this way. Is the fintech piece is somewhat low hanging fruit in terms of like the level of effort to build and launch and have a great partner behind the scenes powering kind of all the fintech pieces is like pretty standard nowadays. It really wasn't 10 years ago, and so the use case is someone comes to your home, you have to get your HVAC either fixed or replaced. That technician would create an estimate, a good, better, best estimate.
Right.
And the good could be, hey, we can, we can basically fix it, and maybe it's a temporary solution for the next year, or we could replace it from like a standard HVAC unit, or we could replace it with like a high efficiency unit that's like energy saver. So it's a good, better, best, right? It could cost $2,000, $4,000, or $8,000. And in that, transaction, essentially, you as the homeowner with an iPad or phone or just Android device, you can tap to pay your credit card. You could write out a check. You could type in your accounting and routing number and do an
Mhm.
ACH, or they could take a picture of your check front and back. It's called a Check 21 transaction. So essentially, we wanted to give them a bunch of basically tools on the job so they could close it right there. We also had an extension. We might have been one of the first companies to ever do like embedded finance, in a consumer experience with the vertical SaaS software. So you could also get it financed with like say zero interest, zero payments for 18 months, like on the spot. So you fill in a
Yeah.
few information as a homeowner, and then in 30 seconds, you basically get back an approval application for getting it financed. So we basically had a lot of different payment options for customers. And then you want to partner as a SaaS company with the best fintech companies behind the scenes to power that.
So first finance, and then where did y'all go from there?
It was finance and then credit cards and checks. So it basically created a whole kind of fintech ecosystem of options to allow that, customer to, collect that payment. Or sometimes payments are done in installments. So they could call the office later on. The office could log in the web app and find that, that customer and that outstanding invoice and pay off that invoice there as well. So that was like the first few from, I'd say 2015 to 2017. Those are all consumption based products. And what's interesting, kind of with most industries, there's a lot of seasonality. And so, similar with the HVAC world, kind of makes sense, right? When
Mhm.
May and June rolls around, you're in, Arizona, it's like 110 degrees already. You as a homeowner, with a family, you're like, hey, if my AC is not working, I just have to get it fixed now. I'm not going to like wait
Mhm.
until later on in the summer. So a lot of the volume happens in different spots in the year. So that spike. So we saw, for example, in 20 probably at 2017 when we first started rolling it out, a lot of volume hit. And then come this time, right in September, the volume's kind of lowered significantly. If it's a big part of your business, there just happens to be a lot of seasonality. So one
Uh-huh.
idea is that like we have a lot of consumption-based products at that point, call it 2017, 2018. We also want to come up with, just more subscription-based options as well. It didn't have to be like that, but that was kind of some ideas behind it. And really it was around the marketing piece, which was interesting because it's one of those things that customers weren't asking for. It's kind of like when you're creating products,
Interesting.
you don't always go down the route of like, hey, if customers are asking for it, we should build it. No customers were asking, hey, can you create marketing automation for us? It's only because that didn't exist. Like they didn't know it was a possibility. So we just had this overall idea is that like when we looked at customers' data, talking to them, one easy example is that they're downloading all customer contacts. So say, for example, you are a contractor in Phoenix, Arizona, and you have 10,000 customer records, right, in the CRM or i.e. ServiceTitan. You
Mhm.
have to download, portions of the contacts, upload it in, say, MailChimp or Constant Contact or whatever email automation tool you're using. You basically hire designers to create, an email campaign. You send that email out. And you can track
Right.
obviously certain attributes of that email, clicks and things like that, but you can't tie it to the ROI. For example, Raleigh called that HVAC contractor and said, hey, thanks for the email. I definitely want someone to come out and check out my HVAC unit. So there wasn't like that whole tying in the loop in terms of did a job result from that email that went out? And obviously that's what you want in marketing. So that
Mhm.
was just one thing that we thought of like, hey, why don't we build it within our own application? If we have to leverage tools and partners behind the scenes to do it, let's do it. Because we'd actually close the loop and have very customized, tailored campaigns where they can actually track ROI. And obviously, knowing your customer B2B2C, we interviewed and talked to a lot of customers.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask, you said you look for home runs. So, I mean, in this case, was this more of a bet or did you guys have enough evidence that it would be a home run?
That's a good question. I would say most vertical SaaS companies that I know the building have, 10 years ago, like Titan or today, most of them should be home runs just because you should know enough in order to like execute appropriately. Like, if you're building an AI agent nowadays, right, that does a lot of like, potentially call answering, for their customers or sending SMSs and emails, there's enough proof points out there today that it can create a lot of value and maybe you can charge $100 a month and it's pretty high gross margin product in general. So I would say they're not home runs in the sense of they all equal 100 million of ARR individual products, but like, if you forecast appropriately, do enough customer diligence, generally they're all pretty successful.
Okay. So you guys did finance and the whole fintech ecosystem, then marketing. Did you guys expand to anything after that?
Yeah, there's some nuanced things in the trades, like a price book catalog type of thing we created because we saw some friction with our customers that, again, customers weren't asking for. We just saw a pain point in multiple areas of onboarding and the right data. And so we kind of created our own version as well. We did do telecommunications and, voice AI pretty early on before the whole Gen AI phase, partnering with a company behind the scenes. Say, for example, while you call up this plumbing and then a customer service representative answers the phone. They could
Right.
do automatic transcriptions, voice sentiment, things like that, or, to detect opportunities. That was, I think, in 2018, 2019.
Way,
So that
way
was
ahead of the whole wave of vertical receptionists or like AI receptionists now, it sounds like.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so what's interesting about that one is that, that the only people that pay for that, the license are basically CSR licenses, right? So we're able to figure out pricing where it's not like you have to it's a charge for the whole organization, or it's like one, monthly cost. It's tied to a specific user. So certain products were tied to certain users. Some are consumption based. Some are more of just a generic, hey, here's a marketing module. So the pricing really kind of depended upon who got value from that product.
Okay. All right. I think we have a really good understanding of the high level of going multi-product and why you should think about it. I'm curious, you talked a bit about where in ServiceTitan's journey you guys started that, but today, let's fast forward to 2025. Obviously, very fast moving world. Companies are building product a lot faster now, especially with a lot of the newer coding tools. For many of the companies that you advise today, what do you typically see and what do you recommend as how to think about when you should actually expand from your core product to multiple products?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, a lot depends on the customer base and their appetite to, adopt more products pretty early on a journey. But I've seen a lot of companies below 100, below a million of ARR already launch, a multi-product strategy. So for example, software for architects. You could have like a core solution on the maybe back office side, but then you may have a solution where the architects are in the fields, taking photos and creating tasks and things like that. So it could be like an AI agent to help them out in the field, things like that. So I
Hmm.
think, I've noticed a lot of companies going down that road because, kind of to your point, it's not that difficult to build these, MVP solutions that they can out really fast as long as you do proper diligence. That's one side of it. The other side of it is there's all these embedded tools now in companies that, again, didn't exist 10 years ago. Now you could launch fintech much easier, market automation, payroll, accounting. It's all about picking and choosing the right ones and focusing and hiring the right people to build it out and making sure it's successful. But I would say pretty early on in every company's journey, when you get to a couple million to 3 million of ARR, you want to have at least one add-on product along the way now. By the time you're 10 million, if you're a vertical SaaS company, probably like three or four essentially. So it's definitely
Really?
the curve of starting should be much earlier now.
And what's the balance there in terms of obviously there's value to proving that out, but also at the same time, I mean, consistently we think about this at Orbital, it's just all about focus. Like it's really hard to even nail your core product. Is there some balance or trade-off there?
That's a great question. Yeah. So the way I think about it is, especially that early, to your point, it should still be about net new customer acquisition and retention, and making them successful. But like swiping off a pretty small team, like part-time PM, maybe one full stack engineer, helps with DevOps and QA and design, with maybe a go-to-market person helping them create, the tiger team behind that. Basically, think of it as like a startup within a startup. And that's kind of how I thought about it as well when I created the first product. Basically had that team, which is basically myself and two people, because it was the idea that I want to execute on, and had a couple of resources behind it, but not a lot. So it wasn't like a risky bet, just because we didn't spend a lot of money to build it out, at least an MVP or something to get to an alpha. So I think in a lot of that MVP team is basically scoping it out, making sure it's the right product to build. You're building the right features. We get early customer adoption and feedback and pricing and all that. So I think that's where you can de-risk it, as long as you have the right small tiger team in place that can execute on it. They don't all have to be full time on it, but obviously it's a little slower to ramp to get it going. But it's kind of like
Hmm.
snowball effect. Once you get it going, start the MVP, starting customers on it, you see the value, then you obviously put more resources on it and keep on going. So that's one way a lot of companies do it. They don't go all in and split half R&D resource in core and half
Right.
on products. It's more of like 96% on core and 4% on add-on products. And then it shifts over time.
Are there any other considerations for when you should do it and any reasons you shouldn't do it early on, or any like whether it's an industry or just like something about your company that makes it less advantageous to or distracting to?
Yeah, I mean, now there's these very specific vertical AI solutions that are solving a very discrete pain point, like voice
Hmm.
AI and things like that. Where if you're not the end-to-end operating system and you're focusing on one thing and you want to be world class at that, generally it doesn't make sense to add on products at a certain stage. But say, for example, your software for pet professionals, like daycare, boarding, training, mobile grooming van companies. There's different verticals within the pet professional industry, but if you think about it, they need fintech taking, credit cards and, taking payment. There's like marketing automation solutions where they email me, right? And I see like a discount. Hey, I can send my dog for 20%, right, in the next 2 weeks because, there's some open availability. So that's like an end-to-end operating system. Generally, those should build pretty early on because there's definitely solid use cases for it. If you're more like vertical AI and solving a very discrete pain point, then, probably doesn't make any sense to start.
Could you talk through? I'm curious because when I hear one product at 2, 3 million and 3, 4 products at 10 million, in my head, it's a bit hard to fully conceptualize like what does that look like actually in terms of like what a product is. Can you talk through an example for a specific vertical, what that evolution might look like?
Sure. So I'll just use the example of laundromats, right? So say it's a software for laundromats. It helps run your business. You walk in, you can check your dashboard, you can check, people, making reservations, things like that. But then when someone comes in and swipes their, do tap to pay for it, that's an extension of the product, right? Like, so some people, which kind of makes sense. It could be
Yeah.
thought of as core, but it's really not. It's like, you're charging for fintech as well. So that's something that's kind of the natural, uh, basically use case of that customer coming in, making a payment, kind of like Toast, right? Essentially the fintech part of Toast really is an add-on, but it's not. It's part of the core business. So that's why
hmm
a lot of times the fintechs is synonymous with the core product, even though it's considered an add-on.
Okay, so maybe at 2 million, 3 million, that makes sense as sort of a starting place. And then I guess by the time you get to 10 million, like what might be those other products added on?
Yeah, you're going back to the marketing piece now,
Okay,
right? Like,
so
the
yeah,
ability of, that small business to email, send an SMS out, manage their reputation and their listings through one application. A lot of that and the ability to throttle ad spend, things like that. There's a lot around marketing in general. I would say those are the two most popular categories I've seen is the fintech piece and the
hmm
marketing automation, because now it's just so much easier to build these tools because there's all these different, great software companies that power vertical SaaS companies. So you can basically even use components of another software company to build an MVP with like, one engineer for a couple of sprints just to get an MVP out versus 10 years ago, that didn't exist. You had to do a full, designs and full, product development lifecycle. Nowadays it's much easier to test it out and get it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a natural segue to the actual like how to start thinking about implementing. The first thing I'm kind of curious about there is like I mean, today and maybe ServiceTitan is different, but when you see companies do this today, are they always treated as a separate product and that they are charged, packaged, et cetera, differently? Or now that you see companies doing it so early, is it almost just like the core product actually is marketing and finance and like the original scheduling, workflow, whatever, kind of software?
It's a good question. It really depends. I've seen some companies added like the top tier package, right? Good, better, best package to your customers. The top tier packages have maybe the market automation piece, things like that, where they can charge a little bit more. So whether they treat it as separate add-on, which is separate, SKU, or actually has the top tier package, either way, it's still considered, right, expansion or ACV expansion, just because it's in a higher package. It's all about the adoption and the perception of customers too. If they want to spend more, adopting that higher package versus thinking of something as an add-on product.
Let's say you're thinking about your vertical SaaS company, starting to think about executing this. It sounds like there's probably a number of trade-offs I know other founders kind of think through, and I'd love to walk through them. One is build versus partner. Two is how do you actually incorporate this into your pricing and business model. And then three is how do you build and test this in a way that is actually not distracting. Maybe starting with the first, build versus partner, how you like recommend a company thinks about the trade-off there? And is there a single right answer, or in what situations does one kind of make more sense than the other?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely build, partner, and buy. Obviously a lot of early stage companies maybe can't buy, but even past 5 million of ARR, totally plausible to buy like an AI tuck-in product that's maybe 200K
Oh,
ACV.
like acquire?
Yeah. Yeah. And so a lot of companies go through that whole, build by partner kind of framework of, if we're creating this new solution, should we do or should we not? Usually, obviously, the build itself usually takes longer, but you have more control. The partner obviously leveraging some APIs, webhooks, and components to build it. And then the third one, the buy part, it happens to be a great asset out there that makes sense, which usually is not the case, to be honest. I usually lean on the partnership side, especially when obviously you have so many finite resources because most folks should focus on the core product for a long time as you get going. And as long as you find the right partner, the right tech that gives great service, and it can negotiate the best buy rates, generally you can have a really profitable product that's easier to get off the ground. And actually, you don't need that domain expertise to like build it. Like, so for example, say you wanted to build embedded payroll from scratch versus leverage a partner behind the scenes, or wanted to build embedded payments like credit cards versus leverage a partner. Those are very complicated fintech solutions to like build from the ground up. You kind of need your own probably 5 to 10 engineers just like build it itself versus leveraging a partner where you need 1 or 2 engineers to get out on MVP.
Is there another path here that's actually like integrate as well? I'm thinking of like the QuickBooks of the world. You can embed, something like bookkeeping, or you can just integrate with the other tools that folks are using. Do you have to do one or the other, or how do you typically see companies approach that trade-off?
Yeah. So, just like any marketplace out there, it could be, Procore marketplace or where there's a lot of integrations. And so they don't have to build all the core, other functions out and, customers can sign up for integration partners. I think that totally makes sense. And a lot of times when you do have an add-on product, you may have a somewhat competing integration partner that's on the marketplace too, that a customer may join. I actually like that approach where customer has options because ultimately software businesses, you just want to serve the customer the best you can, even if you're potentially not monetizing everything you can, as long as like servicing them, they have great lifetime value. So the integration approach does make a lot of sense. What I've seen it not as much value as your own add-on product. If you own your code base and you can do a lot more in your own product itself by having a better user experience, by having everything within it and offer a lot more KPI and reporting and everything like that versus like see with an integration, sometimes you bounce to another app as a user or, it's maybe like, 50% of the value of your own product. So I think you can do both and it's actually makes sense to sometimes to try integrations to start. Even then you may have your own solution as well. So as long as it's constructed the right way, I think both approaches are pretty good.
Yeah, something, I mean, we've even seen in our own product is integrations often are the precursor to you wanting to go build something deeper, right? You can actually understand that usage and see what are folks actually trying to connect to your tool. And then over time, you can always offer your sort of own alternative to that integration.
That's right. Yeah. Like an example is, one company I help, like they want to integrate with like these AI security cameras. So like they're not a hardware company. In theory, they could build their own and manufacture their own devices, but like it just doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of really great AI camera devices out there and where it's like, it makes sense. You can pull in data in your software. You can have more, insights for your customers. So sometimes it's a no brainer. Sometimes it's maybe not, where, maybe if you're, software for restaurants. Like there's a lot of like review type of solutions out there today that helps restaurants with reviews. You can build your own, or you can partner with a lot of companies that are out there. And so you may want to do both. And you may, to your point, we just want to partner first and see how it goes, and then maybe build your own.
How do you see companies actually approach the pricing and packaging today? And I'm particularly interested in this idea of, when you're at ServiceTitan, I imagine you could actually charge these as like discrete standalone packages because they were net new to you or any tool in the market. Fast forwarding to today, I could see a world where actually it's more like the bare minimum is that you're doing everything. And so I'm curious both how you'd recommend pricing or packaging, but also is there any sort of dynamic around like actually because it's expected and it actually can't be something you can charge that much more for? It's more just like table stakes.
Yeah, on the pricing part, one way to think about it, especially if your ACVs are between 6K to 50K, and you're selling software to a small business. But in aggregate, if you have all of your products, including your add-on products, if that one customer is signing up for all of them, they'll be paying $200,000 a year. A lot of times these businesses don't want to spend all that up front. They want to get going with like the core product. They want to get to see the value of it. And once they see the value, they're like, all right, you know what? I'll sign up for this other module now that I'm off and running. It's actually great for net revenue retention because you can upsell other products along the way and it creates more stickiness. So there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to sell it all or incorporate it all into one big product up front. Because one, the customer's perception could be it's just too expensive. There's too much. And you may or may not need everything right away, depending upon your business and your growth. And so that's what we did at ServiceTitan at Cloud Kitchens with Otter. It's basically like a digital POS system too. Restaurants can choose a lot of different things. It's kind of like a menu essentially. You don't have to get the entire, all of the different applications, but you can sign up for 2 or 3 of the core ones and then sign up for other ones as you kind of, move along with your business.
I had a really interesting conversation with one of our customers recently. They were basically repackaging and pricing. They've added on all these different add-ons and they basically are deciding between charging for each add-on, it's like a standalone add-on. So you're like, oh, marketing automation costs this much and, this costs that much. And then the alternative was just like more like, small, medium, large, where instead of it being mapped to just like very specific like functionality, like marketing, it more is just that the functionality or the thresholds for each of those offerings. You get 20 emails a day in one, and then you get 100 emails a day in the middle tier. So you have access to like all of the different capabilities of the platform, but they're just like capped based on a threshold. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you see there as the right kind of playbook for companies to run?
I think in the beginning, especially any business less than 150 million of ARR, like you also don't want to make it complicated for your customers. You don't want to like have too many options where it's like overwhelming and you don't ever want your customer to feel like nickel and dime. So like that's really the whole genesis behind it. Like if the product doesn't add like enough value for the actual price of it and there's a lot of pushback, that means it's not the right product to have as an add-on product. Maybe you throw it part of a core and maybe not all customers adopt it, but like that's a big part of discovery. That's when I mentioned home run and no brainer. Like the marketing automation piece, we knew that, for example, if we could help customers just close a few more jobs a month, it paid for the software itself. And that's what you want.
Mhm.
That's ideally, right? Like if you close 5 customers a month because of this market automation solution, then, basically it's free for the next 6 years. That's how valuable it is. And so when you find something that valuable, you kind of want to treat it, in my mind, as a standalone solution, just because you want to have more focus on it versus if you incorporate it as part of the core. It also it depends on customers. Not maybe customers are just not ready for it. And that's when we kind of found out like, hey, they're kind of worried about, wow, I'm going to email my entire customer base potentially from this software. I don't know. I feel uncomfortable about doing that. So maybe we'll start small. So, I would say when we launched that solution, maybe only 25 to 30% of customers were like ready for something like that, back 8 years
Mhm.
ago. Nowadays, this is a pretty normal thing to do for small businesses. So there's multiple factors to think through around packaging pricing and whether it should be a part of the core or whether or not it should be. I always recommend every company should develop their own framework, like buy, build, partner, the criteria behind it, and there should be a criteria of like, should this product be considered part of the core? Should be considered part of an add-on? If it's part of the core, which packaging? Generally, there's like frameworks you can develop. We're asking intelligent questions and scoring it and, understanding from customers to basically almost give you the answer based on like a scoring methodology. That's kind of what we did at ServiceTitan.
What does it look like then to actually put this into practice? So let's say you go work with the end. You talked about this idea of a tiger team. Awesome. Split that off, actually build an MVP of this product. From a commercialization standpoint, once you have something built, what does it look like to test? And then over time, what does it look like to actually try to cross-sell that product into your core user base?
Yep. Great question too. I always recommend that it should be commercially oriented. So instead of having your CX team, whether it's implementation success, support, sell it to the customers, unless it's already a team that's used to selling and upselling, renewing contracts, and they're commercially oriented. Most vertical SaaS companies are not like that. Leveraging like an SDR from the sales team, working closely with a go-to-market leader, like part-time, obviously the right commissioning and quota comp, behind it,
Mhm.
testing that out with like essentially maybe an early AE or an SDR to like engage customers on the upsell product for existing customers to start. That's the best place to start is existing customers. And just create simple go-to-market campaigns with 1 or 2 people from a sales perspective is usually the best approach. Always obviously leveraging the CX team to send over like CS, QLs, right? Customer success qualified leads based on certain criteria to those few SDRs and AEs to start to get the ball rolling. That's usually the best approach. And different companies call it different things. It could be called account managers or install base account executives or upsell, account
Mhm.
executives. So there's different terms for it, but generally they're more commercially oriented folks that sell.
How did you guys approach, let's say you're now rolling out marketing automation. How did you guys at ServiceTitan decide who was actually the right person? You mentioned you guys realized maybe your whole user base isn't ready for this or only a subset was ready for it. How did you determine who to sell it to? Because it sounds like you shouldn't just go call everyone or email everyone to try to sell it.
Yeah. Great question too. Combination of I love surveys and webinars, right? Like it could be a Pendo survey, it could be, anything you want to use, that type form to certain customers that, have a high NPS or, understand the product, have been on the product for a little while now, or, maybe adopted some other products. So it's pretty easy to spot the ones that would potentially adopt another product along the way, even if it's your first add-on product. And then, say, you do a webinar, you show high res mocks. It's so easy to do now and you did the value of it. And at the end of the webinar, hey, can you click up, it could be a form right there. Like, hey, are you interested in this product if once we get into alpha and beta? So you can collect a lot of, potential customers really early on in the discovery. And, maybe you only need, 3 to 5% of your customers in an alpha beta before GA. I mean, that's even probably pushing it. You probably don't even need that much. But even like 20, 30 customers that are in an alpha and beta, like learning from you, I'm learning from them and like testing out the product and all that, like that's enough usually in vertical SaaS to know if once you have, great product market fit before you go GA.
Where does this go wrong? Like, I mean, it sounds great in theory. You can add a ton of revenue, drive more long-term retention, as well as expand sort of your breadth of offering. I'm guessing it does not always work out well, though. I'm curious, what are the common pitfalls you've seen?
Totally. A great question. So example, I've seen this pitfall happen all the time, help companies is that they actually choose the wrong fintech company. So say, for example, power payments. They don't maybe not have a person internally that understands like underwriting and kind of, non-qualification pricing, just generally everything around fintech, which is not that complicated, but it takes a little bit of time to learn. And they may choose a generic partner who may not give them the right support or the right APIs or webhooks to build out, the best solution, or maybe not give the best service to their customers where there happens to be like bugs in like the integration, slow, time to get paid for the actual end customer. And generally they launch, for example, a payment solution with not getting the adoption that they want or a lot of bugs and issues because I think maybe they didn't do the proper diligence or choose the right partner to build that integration or have that go-to-market motion thought about. A lot of times companies try to have the CSMs upsell the product, but as a CSM, you're focused on the customer success. Like if a customer is like,
Yeah.
hey, I need help on this module. And if you have the CSMs do that, and by the end of the call, like, oh, by the way, would you want to start payments? Or like, well, I still have a bunch of issues and, things like that. I'd love you to help me on. The CSM's not going to push that new product. They're going to, focus on helping the customer.
I actually saw a really interesting talk on Friday at like a founder summit. This company was like 20 million ARR, and they basically were talking about how right after a contract was signed, they actually used that as an opportunity to basically try to upsell the customer and sort of had an exploding offer around it. I'm curious, are there any other like hacks or things you've just seen in actually executing this strategy, whether it's the building or the distribution of the add-on?
Yeah. On the fintech piece, I'll go back to that. Like ideally, if you're vertical SaaS product, you want to get them live before they go live with the software. So a lot of times, you sell the customer on your core product, and then maybe it takes 2 to 4 weeks to implement them on the core software. In that time frame, you also want to upsell and onboard them on payments too. So the minute they flip live on the software, they're also taking payments. So for example, software for martial arts studios, right? You take your kids or yourself to like a jujitsu studio, you set up as a new member, the software flips on live. You want to make sure those members are all paying through the software versus a different vendor from the
Right.
beginning. Because the longer you wait on payments, the less likely it is for the actual small business to adopt payments. Like post 90 days go live, any customer that hasn't already signed up for payments, it's much harder to get them because they're already used to a different workflow versus get used to your own software workflow. So another part is like market automation. Sometimes you don't want to sell it up front because you want to get all your contact and customer records set up appropriately. So they're sending the right email to the right, email address based on the homeowner or the customer. And sometimes it takes some configuration to get that going. So we actually chose to sell it when they're live versus early on.
That makes sense. So we talked through ServiceTitan. Is there like another company you've seen kind of go through this journey that maybe it looked a bit different than the ServiceTitan multi-product journey?
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about two. One is BuildOps. So BuildOps is software for commercial contractors. So think of like commercial real estate properties like hospitals, schools, or, in Manhattan, obviously giant skyscrapers. There's actually different types of contractors that services those buildings. And it's B2B to B versus B2B to C. So for example,
Right.
their customers are property management companies and, business entities. So even if you just think of like payments, a lot of time in that world, B2B is mostly done through credit cards, checks, ACH, but really more on the checks and ACH side versus credit cards. So there's like less monetization on the credit card side, but still valuable to launch payments because you're creating a lot of, value of like, the customer sending out an invoice with a digital payment and then time to reconcile payments can go much faster and smoother. So there's different kind of value props there. Another solution that we launched at BuildOps was like fleet management. If you're a commercial contractor with 500 trucks on the road, and you're sending all these, technicians out to different sites, say in like, Manhattan, you want to track where they are so we can kind of like auto clock in once you're close to a property based on the address. So there's a lot of value we can do that as well. That's why it's really tailored to specific industries. I use the one for pet professionals already, right? Kind of similar to any like small business, but this is more of like a retail feel, right? You drop off your dog at daycare, training, boarding. So it's more of a retail thing of like point of sale right there. A lot of times if you go to like a border, they may have a bunch of products there. So you can have like an e-com experience in your app, like, hey, here's doggy
Interesting.
treats, these
Yeah.
things. And so and then you take the payment right there, where maybe you're spending $100 a month on your dog, but then, you get upsold by the products there, but you can all have like within a single POS right on the spot. So each industry kind of garners its own kind of add-on products and strategy behind it. And I think the key is it's just to focus on the ones that add the most value.
Ershad, anything else we didn't cover? Tips, tricks, hacks, or pitfalls when it comes to this topic?
I think one thing that companies don't really think about upfront is just setting the proper goals and KPIs. I think a lot of companies misforecast their add-on products initially. They expect probably more adoption than probably will be based on, like essentially like a PM or, someone in finance doing a forecast versus like going a bit deeper in terms of like segmenting your customers by SMB, mid-market enterprise, by invoice volume, by, bips per customer per month based on credit cards and ACH. Some customers just do a kind of linear straight line forecast and kind of miss targets the first year just because they overestimate or they don't have even the right KPIs to measure success, right? Like number of customers you want to onboard per month, average take rate you want to have per month that goes up over time. So, usually you want someone that has done it before to really educate and help the company think through what's the best way to forecast and have the right, weekly and monthly and quarterly KPIs. A lot of companies kind of just launch and kind of hope for the best.
Okay, for the last portion of this, wanted to ask just a few rapid fire questions, starting with what company are you just most excited about right now in vertical SaaS?
Honestly, I like the whole idea of like going hyper verticalized in general in certain industries that are just personally for me a lot of fun. Like my two daughters are in jujitsu and I'm of a board of a software company that makes software for martial arts studios. Both founders are grandmasters of martial arts. And so I love it that like, these founders come from the industry, they're, well recognized and it's like a very niche industry, but niche industries have, can have massive wins nowadays, especially with tech. So like companies like that, I love.
Very cool. Where do you think we are in like the vertical SaaS saturation? It feels like every single day a new company is being founded targeting a new vertical. Or yeah, where are we at in sort of the saturation or oversaturation of the vertical SaaS playbook?
I think it's still pretty early on in general, just because, I use the term, vertical horizontal, like ServiceTitan, what I call vertical horizontal. They're in the trades. The trades has about 25-ish trades. Think of like plumbing, HVAC, electrical, garage door, chimney sweep, landscaping, tree trimming. There's like 25 of them. That's on the residential side. There's probably 20 on the commercial side. So there's two different segments, but how do they service, all of them like the best way possible? Versus you take a company like Skimmer, it's software for pool and spa contractors on the residential side. So it's very niche. Think of all that and it's just focused on one specific vertical, what I call it. You can go super deep in pool and spa contractors. The way I always give the example, if you're going to a conference and you're pool and spa contractor, do you really want to meet like a landscaper or an
Right.
HVAC technician? Maybe, but in general, you want to be around people that, can build a business similar to yours. And so I think the more niche companies go, kind of that martial arts studio software, the more value they can create based on certain workflows. So for example, in martial arts and jujitsu, there's different belts and different things along the way. And you want to
Mhm.
have your application. You want to know that, hey, like, Ershad's coming in, he's at this belt right now. These are the things that he needs to get to the next belt. It's much more tailored to you, but versus if you're a generic software, you can't do that.
If you were to start a vertical SaaS company today, I know you're full time on advising, but if you were, what space would you dive into first?
If you think of, concrete and highways, paving your driveway, like, with infrastructure, around the globe, it always needs to be revamped. Like that's always a need that's going to be there. You always need to have plants that manufacture these things, contractors pick up the cement, obviously pave a highway or a driveway, things like that. That's still like a pretty high, industry in terms of GMV, but there's not a lot of sophisticated software as of yet. I'm helping one company in that space, which is super fascinating. So I think there's a lot of things to do. And then if you throw on vertical AI and developing AI agents along with the core software, then you create a lot of value.
Awesome. And then last question, how are you working with companies today? And if folks are interested in getting in touch, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, yeah, thanks for asking. So, yeah, honestly, like I love helping out on the go-to-market strategy side, creating add-on products, the partnership piece, pricing, all the above is kind of really fascinating for me. And, my wife has a small family business. They sell tarps and tents. So that's kind of what got me into SMB vertical SaaS, like probably like 12 years ago. And so yeah, like any of those, SMB industries that, anyone's building for, I just generally like helping, those areas.
Awesome. And what's the best way to get in touch with you? Just LinkedIn or email
LinkedIn
or
works.
something else? Yeah.
LinkedIn works pretty. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on today, Rashad.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.